We're nearing the end of Aetherdrift spoiler season, and we're finally starting to see some incredibly powerful cards be revealed. Today I'm going to be going over some of these incredibly powerful tools, where they'll fit, and why I think we're about to see a big shakeup in the meta. I'm going to start us off first with the card that I'm the most excited for so far. I think this card may actually get banned down the line. The card I am talking about is Monument to Endurance. This is a 3-mana artifact that cares whenever you discard a card. It gives you 3 options, and you can choose one each turn, or each one once per turn. All 3 of these options that are draw a card, create a treasure token, and each opponent loses 3 life are all incredibly relevant. There is a massive amount of synergy in Izzet that supports discarding cards and drawing cards right now. And I think Monument to Endurance could play a massive role in a new kind of deck that wants to rummage through cards and effectively just eliminate your opponent through that way. This deck is effectively probably going to be a more control-orientated deck that just removes creatures while discarding cards, drawing cards to ascend its game plan. It can protect the Monument from removal by being in blue with counter magic. I really do think there is a world where Monument to Endurance may be the next tier 1 deck. I'm very enthusiastic about this card, if you couldn't tell. I do see some potential in this in Azorius as well. There's a card we'll be covering in a bit that could potentially support an Azorius control deck that uses this as its win con. There's also a few mill pieces coming up that I'll be going over that could support that as well. But Monument to Endurance, I think, could single-handedly push heavy control-based strategies to be able to run full control to keep aggro down while being able to rely on this to win the game. Drawing a card is amazing, creating a treasure is amazing, and the drain gives it an inevitability. Not to mention the synergy you will get when you're able to copy this card with things such as 3 Steps Ahead, which not only is a counter spell that can discard cards and draw you cards, it can also target an artifact and a copy of it. The more copies of this you have on the battlefield, the more times you can repeat on one of these 3 triggers. So the limitation of this card is only that the individual copy can't repeat this effect. Monument to Endurance, having multiple copies of that, will circumvent this. I'll definitely be looking to run this deck on day 1. I'm going to be streaming this in Mythic. I'm going to be scrambling up to Mythic before Aetherdrift comes out, and I reckon I'll be building a Monument to Endurance Izzet deck first thing. And I have a feeling this deck will be pretty hard to beat day 1. We may see the meta have to warp around this card. Next up, we're definitely not stepping back because we have a brand new aggro tool in Burnout Bastronaut. This is a red 1-mana Start Your Engines card. We've been waiting for cards that have Start Your Engines on them for 1 mana. We've seen a Nesting Bot already. Red gets Burnout Bastronaut, which is probably the strongest 1-drop of the bunch. There is a black one that we'll cover momentarily. But Burnout Bastronaut having Menace means that on turn 1, if you play this and your opponent responds with a creature, you can still get through that and rev up the engine, so to speak. The max speed on this is pretty intimidating as well. It's able to buff itself, and giving itself Double Strike will effectively double dip into the buff it gives itself, making it pretty relevant later on too. I do think this will be an aggro tool, maybe a mid-range tool if Start Your Engine sees play in a mid-range strategy, but definitely one to watch. Equally, Gas Guzzler is a 1-drop in black that has Start Your Engines. The other day I was talking about a Aristocrats deck that sacrifices creatures to start your engine and rev it up. I think this card could play a role in a kind of sacrifice-themed Start Your Engines deck. And we also have that 2-drop with Start Your Engines in Orzhov from earlier that we covered. I think Gas Guzzler might be the icing on the cake to push that archetype. I think it does confirm my suspicions that Orzhov Sacrifice might be back on the menu, which is very exciting for Aristocrats players. The payoff of being able to sacrifice something at instant speed to draw a card is pretty great. That is creatures or vehicles you can sacrifice. Though I don't know how consistently you'll get a good vehicle as a scapegoat to sacrifice. The Chandra Planeswalker comes to mind for that, so you may run this in a Rakdos start your engines mid-range kind of strategy. Having said that, though, I do think you'll put this in any deck that wants to try and get the engines running early. As Orzhov is already shaping up to care about that, so I expect we'll see Gas Guzzler as well. Arcade, at this point, I've just realized I have not put the cards on the board. I'm going to do it now if you want to just edit it and do a little bit. I don't mind. But yeah, go nuts with that. Next up, we have Radiant Lotus. This is a brand new Lotus, and it definitely lives up to the reputation that Lotuses have. It's a 6 mana cost, so quite steep, but once it comes into play, and if you are able to activate this thing, I expect you may generate so much of a lead that you win the game. I wasn't kidding when I said we really got some powerful spoilers today, and Radiant Lotus demonstrates that if you can amass a bunch of tokens, think about maps, clues, treasures obviously, you can just sacrifice all those artifact tokens, generate a whole bunch of mana, and generally use that mana to put yourself so far ahead that the game's probably over. I expect Radiant Lotus to be pretty damn good in older formats that will cheat this, or likely, I think the Khan Planeswalker will probably put this in its sideboard perhaps, as just a tool to bring into the battlefield when it's ready. I think the further back you go, the more cards available, Radiant Lotus just becomes way better. I still think it will be really good in Standard too. Commander players are going to want this. Treasure decks are definitely going to want this. Map, clue, all those kind of cheap little token artifacts, I reckon they're the best things to throw into the Lotus. Though I wouldn't be surprised if there's plenty of other ways to break this card. Definitely a very powerful Eternal card. Next up we have Gonti Knight Minister. Some really cool looking art. Which does compensate a little bit for the slightly weaker power level than the Radiant Lotus. When this card deals, or rather I should say, when a player casts a spell they don't own, that player will create a treasure token, which is helpful obviously. There are probably some treasure strategies that care about this. It is a rogue, so it might go in the Olivia Outlaw deck. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, you can effectively look at the top card of their library, exile it, and play it later. Gonti's pretty known for having this effect, and I do think this is actually quite a powerful one. In Standard, it compares very well to Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor. Gix fell out of favor a little bit, but does pop up now and again as a creature you slap down when you already have a presence on the field to draw cards. Gonti reminds me a lot of that. He does, however, cost it 1 extra mana, though it is offset by the treasure you do create when you do cast a spell that your opponent controls, but I suspect Gix is probably just a bit stronger for the moment. Gonti could see some play maybe when Gix rotates out. I do think Gonti has a place though in Outlaw-themed decks or decks that want to steal your cards in Commander. I definitely think it's pretty strong there and one to watch out for. Next up, we have an exciting mythic called the Speed Demon. A brand new demon, which for Standard players is very relevant, though it has fallen out of favor a bit. There is a Golgari Demons deck and a Dimir Demons deck that looks to play Unholy Annex and a bunch of demons to drain your opponent out, and the Speed Demon definitely supports that strategy. It has Start Your Engines, though I suspect it may not be the first card you play with that text. However, given its effect, it may be. Given that you draw cards and lose life where X is your speed, I do think you don't need to be a Start Your Engines deck to play this. Golgari midrange may just want to slot this in as a card. Flying and Trample are great keywords to have. Obviously dice to removal, but it is at the beginning of your end step, meaning if your opponent is tapped out, you can definitely benefit from the effect. I think I would be skeptical running too many copies of this. Drawing 4 and losing 4 is a very steep cost. Golgari Demons didn't have too many ways to gain life aside from Unholy Annex, and that was easy to interact with. So if that does get shut down, the Golgari Demons deck might find itself running low on health. But I do think someone will find a way to make this pretty powerful in Standard. I do think in Commander this is also a really interesting card. Again, I don't think you really need to tap into the Start Your Engines mechanic too much to make this card work. I definitely think you could play this on a turn you already have creatures, start your engines that turn, swing, and you'll set your speed immediately to 2, and at the end of your turn you'll draw 2, lose 2, which I think is a great deal. Yeah, Nothing more to really say about Speed Demon. I think that is a great card. Next up, we have Afterburner Expert. I think this card really pushes Exhaust in a direction I wasn't expecting. I think there will be a world where you may be in Gruul or Simic or some sort of self-mill deck where you'll mill Afterburner Experts, and then you'll use a really cheap Exhaust ability, such as the 1-mana one on the Goblin Draconaut, I think it was called, to bring back all these Afterburner Experts and give them haste. I think that is a really cool deck. That's another deck I might experiment with down the line. And I think it may be competitive. I think you could definitely tailor it to be fast and maybe a little bit slower. Boommobile could be a real card in Standard, though I might have dismissed it originally. I think Boommobile could be an interesting support card in a deck like this, being an artifact that can sit on the battlefield that you can exhaust to bring these back. Interestingly, they don't return tapped, meaning they can act as defense the turn you play them. If you use Draconaut Engineer to give them all haste, you'll activate that ability, they'll come into the battlefield before all creatures get haste, and then you can immediately swing with them, which could be up to 16 damage, which I think often may be lethal in these kind of colors, and this kind of deck that might play it. Definitely, I think one that's going to be one to watch. Very powerful. In Commander, you'll generally only run this in a deck centered around Exhaust, possibly that Loot might want to run it. If you're running a Loot Commander deck, this would be an easy way to bring back a creature when you use one of Loot's abilities. I think that Loot deck will probably do much more powerful stuff than just simply run Exhaust cards, but again, the synergy exists if you are interested. Next up, we have an uncommon called Transit Mage. This one gets a shout out for finishing a long cycle of cards that look for specific costed artifacts. The one that I'm immediately thinking of is Trinket Mage. I know there's X-Mage, there's a lot of them. The 4-5 one was the one that was missing, and we have finished that. In Commander, this card might as well read, when this creature enters, you may search your library for the One Ring, put it into your hand. That card is great, it finds the One Ring, and I think I don't think you'd be unhappy if you got that card from this. Having said that, would you run that in a deck? Maybe, probably not. I think you'll run this in Standard when there's a particular card you really, really want. I can't think of any 4 or 5 mana artifacts that are too relevant right now. It does find the Aether Spark. So if the Aether Spark ends up being very polarizing, maybe Transit Mage just sees play by virtue of being able to always find it. In Commander, like I said, the One Ring, Panharmonicon kind of comes to mind. I'm sure there's others, but generally I think this will be a card that will tutor for a specific strategy or specific piece. Next up, we have River Churn Monument. This is a mill-centric card, tying into my theory that a control deck may be around the corner. This deck is able to be exhausted to make any number of target players mill cards equal to the amount of cards currently in their graveyard. So if someone has 30 cards in their graveyard, you'll make them mill another 30 and possibly win the game. I think it's a very straightforward, what you see is what you get kind of card. I do think that the deck that runs this is specifically a mill deck, making it a bit more narrow. Maybe a self-mill deck wants this, but I don't really like paying 1 mana to do that effect. I feel like I could just play a creature with that text and at least progress my board state. But there may be a world where an Azorius control deck pops up with Jace the Perfected Mind, which is already a very powerful mill tool, and this is another supporting card in that strategy. I think it will still be secondary to Jace. Often I find that the matches where you want Jace to win the game, that's usually enough to do the job. Domain is the main matchup I'm thinking of, and already draws so many cards that Jace the Perfected Mind generally gets you there just on its own. But River Churn Monument, definitely an interesting piece to watch. In Commander, I think this card has a lot of potential too. I know Mill is quite loathed. It does target all players, or any number rather, making it quite a potent Commander card. I think this will probably pop up in Mill strategies, for better or worse, depending on how you feel about Mill. And yeah, I do think that while Jace is in Standard, this is probably secondary, but that could change once rotation happens. Next up, we have Unstoppable Plan. Very cool artwork. Very poor card, actually. So the card it reminds people of is Dramatic Reversal. This is definitely not Dramatic Reversal. Dramatic Reversal, for the record, is a card that is often used in a certain combo. with Isochron Scepter in Commander. It goes infinite with a lot of things, actually. However, again, it can't be stressed that because this card can't be played at instant speed, it lacks a lot of the potency that Dramatic Reversal has, and I think that ultimately will hold it back. Being able to give your creatures effectively vigilance, or, being able to tap them multiple times is interesting. There may be a deck that has abilities that you want to reuse. Unstoppable Plan could work in something like that. It will probably take a bit of tinkering to figure that out. I think that has probably more potential in an Eternal format like Commander, where there's so many cards. I guess you can get it out with Zur, the Enchanter, and build a deck around untapping creatures and using their abilities twice. That could be interesting. Again, I don't see it being overly powerful. I think the decks that could run Unstoppable Plan and abuse it probably just run Dramatic Reversal and abuse that harder. Next up, we have the 4th Gear Hulk. This is Riptide Gear Hulk, and wow. Azurius Control is definitely looking at some win conditions now. This is a 5-mana Gear Hulk with Double Strike and Prowess. A very dangerous combination of words. When effectively you get a Prowess trigger, think about getting 2 in terms of the amount of damage output you would do. Also, one more thing about this card is that when it enters, it allows Azurius to cleanly deal with any kind of threat that may be presenting the board, while also preparing its own. And I think that Azurius Control probably needed something like this to be able to play proactively while also answering something, and I think this could propel Azurius Control back into the format. Azurius has definitely fallen out of favor. This is an artifact creature, but I do think that you don't need to be an artifact deck to really abuse this thing. I think this is just a fantastic card. Azurius often holds up mana at instant speed, meaning if you swing with this and your opponent hasn't got a response, you could deduce to make this a 3/6, deal 6. You could cast even more instants, remove a threat like with Get Lost or Soul Petition. I think there's a lot going for this card, and I suspect we'll be seeing a lot of it. In Commander, it is a for each opponent trigger. And again, the Prowess Double Strike is very relevant. I think of some sort of Narsat Jeskai Prowess deck wanting this. I think a lot of decks that have cheap little cantrips would want this, that are in white and blue. I see a world where this card pops up a lot. Definitely a very powerful card, and I expect it will be very sought after. Next up, we have a very funny card. This is a 2-mana 0/8. That's it. That's what it does. And it gets a shout out for being quite possibly the beefiest body right now in the format for how early it comes down. If you play this against mono red or some variant of red, you may likely stonewall them. They will need to attack with multiple creatures to have a chance of getting through you. Obviously, if they're in Boros, they can Sheltered by Ghost, maybe super double monstrous rage, get through it, but by then you've burnt a lot of resources and are probably in a pretty good spot. That's the only reason this card gets a nomination. The only other synergy this card has is with the Pride of Hullclade. It is in its colors. Pride of Hullclade is a green-blue card. And I think this card could potentially work in a strategy that uses that card. I don't think that will be really standard relevant, but it's funny. Probably worth a mention. In Commander, Octopi are not very good. There is Octavia, the Living Thesis. She has next to no synergy with this card outside of being an octopus herself. Just a funny card, probably going to be better in Standard, though there may be a deck that abuses creature toughness that may want this too. Next up, we have Lumbering Worldwagon. It is the latest in a 3-mana search your library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield, tapped card. There appears to be one of these in every set. This is no different from those in the sense that it comes onto the battlefield, you can ramp. It's a little slow, which is supposedly ramp's weakness. It can be piloted, and its power is going to scale as the game goes on. It doesn't have keywords, though, meaning it will probably be blocked by a 1/1 fish. Yeah, I don't think this is really that good. I think the strongest one we had out as of recently was probably Topiary Stomper, but that card didn't really require anything extra aside from enter it into the battlefield, get to 7 lands, and it had Vigilance, meaning you could attack with it and apply pressure and block. This card requires you to tap your creatures, and the crew cost is 4. I don't think this card's good enough, unfortunately, in both Standard and Commander. And finally, we're finishing with a spicy one. This is the Mimeoplasm Revered one. Mimeoplasm is back. He has a new printing, or it rather, I'm not really sure. This has an X spell in it where you can exile creature cards from your grave, and effectively for mana you can turn Mimeoplasm into a copy of one of those cards. Interestingly, this card scales very well with its X cost. So every X you pay effectively will equate to +3/+3, though you do have to target creatures. As well, it is restricted to only your graveyard. I think in Standard that will hold that back. Graveyard hate is really important, and it's difficult to run cards that only interact with your graveyard in general. It also has a 3 color cost and no keywords. It may be able to become a copy of a particularly powerful creature. The ones that come to mind are mainly the Overlords for their attack triggers. Again, I don't really think that's worth it. But someone smarter than me may be able to figure this out. In Commander, it may be a little different, as the Mimeoplasm, regardless of what copy or what version of it is, can always draw on the pool of creatures you've exiled. So if you play the Mimeoplasm, 3 creatures you choose to exile, and then the Mimeoplasm gets removed, when you bring it back into the battlefield, you'll be able to effectively exile 3 more creatures and choose from a total pool of 6 creatures for it to become. So it's effectively sort of like a shapeshifter toolbox kind of card. I think that's interesting. I think you'll build it around cards that care about dealing combat damage or attacking. I'm still a bit worried about the fact it doesn't have a keyword. I still think it's a chump. It's just going to eat chump blocks non-stop, and that probably won't feel as good. Probably better in Commander than in Standard, though. And that concludes this day's roundup of cards for Aetherdrift. We have definitely hit a new level of power, I think, with this set of cards. We've got some excellent control tools, some combo pieces, a few aggro tools too. I do think Wizards are looking to shake things up. We're still waiting for the last few spoilers. I'm eagerly waiting for the last Gear Hulk to be revealed, which I'm assuming is going to be Rakdos, which is my favorite color combination. Yeah. Outside of that, stay tuned for more spoilers on this channel. If you really enjoyed my content, I'm just starting out but looking to put out content almost on the daily. Please leave any comments about feedback or things you'd like me to cover. I'm going to be talking about Commander and Standard topics, not just reveals. If there's something you want to see, let me know. I'll talk to you in the next one. Cheers.